I'm Samantha Wilson, 34, a single mom whose life changed during our annual Thanksgiving dinner. Everything seemed perfect that evening. Mom's golden turkey, Dad's hearty laugh, my brother's perfect family, until my 12-year-old daughter Emma slipped me a folded note under the mahogany table. My fingers trembled as I read the 3 words that shattered our picture-perfect family gathering. Call 911. I maintained my smile while panic flooded my veins. If you're watching this story, let me know where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more about how intuition can save lives when we least expect it. The Wilson family dinners had always been a complicated affair for me, even before that fateful Thanksgiving night. My relationship with my parents was what most would call strained but functional. We maintained appearances while dancing around unresolved tensions that stretched back to my childhood. Barbara and Harold Wilson had raised their children with traditional values and sky-high expectations in their pristine suburban home that hadn't changed its decor since 1995. Emma, despite our complicated family dynamics, had always adored her grandparents, especially her grandfather Harold. He'd been the one constant male figure in her life since James and I had finalized our divorce 2 years earlier, a separation my parents had never fully accepted. Marriage is forever, Samantha. My mother would remind me whenever the topic arose, usually while aggressively kneading dough or polishing already spotless silverware. Your father and I have been married for 43 years. You just didn't try hard enough. What she never acknowledged was that James's gambling addiction had drained our savings and nearly cost us our home. In the Wilson family, problems weren't discussed. They were swept under immaculately vacuumed rugs. My brother Michael had always been the golden child, successful architect, married to the equally successful Stephanie. What troubled me most in the months leading up to that Thanksgiving wasn't my parents' disappointment. I'd grown accustomed to that, but the subtle changes I'd noticed in Emma. My usually chatty, confident daughter had become increasingly withdrawn after our monthly visits to my parents' house. When I asked what was wrong, she'd shrug and say, "Nothing, Mom. Emma's just adjusting to all the changes." I wanted to believe her, but my professional training nagged at me. Children often internalize family tensions, becoming the emotional barometers for dysfunctional dynamics adults pretend don't exist. Our family dinners had always been performances of normalcy, rather than genuine connections. My mother would spend days preparing elaborate meals while my father retreated to his workshop, emerging only when summoned. Michael and Stephanie would arrive with perfectly wrapped hostess gifts and children dressed like they'd stepped out of a catalog. I'd show up with store-bought dessert and Emma in whatever she'd chosen to wear, already feeling like failures before we'd even entered. The passive-aggressive comments would start almost immediately. "Oh, you brought pie again. Store-bought, I see. Well, it's the thought that counts. Emma's hair is interesting. Very modern. I suppose. How's that counseling job? Still not thinking about getting a real career?" I'd learned to smile through it all, to let the barbs land and pretend they didn't draw blood. But Emma had begun to notice, her eyes darting between family members during these exchanges, absorbing the undercurrents of criticism and judgment that flowed beneath our polite conversations. 3 months before that Thanksgiving, I'd noticed Emma physically pulling away when my father patted her shoulder, something that had never happened before. When I asked her about it later, she changed the subject so quickly it left me uneasy. "Do you not want to go to Grandma and Grandpa's anymore?" I'd asked her one evening as I tucked her in, something she claimed she was too old for but still secretly enjoyed. "It's fine," she'd said, focusing intently on arranging her stuffed animals. "Grandpa's just been weird lately." "Weird how?" I'd pressed, but she'd shrugged and pulled the covers up. "Just weird. Different. Can we watch that baking show tomorrow?" I'd let it go, making a mental note to pay closer attention during our next visit. But between work, Emma's school activities, and my own therapy sessions trying to rebuild my self-esteem after the divorce, the concern had slipped to the back of my mind. What kind of counselor misses signs from her own daughter? What kind of daughter ignores changes in her own father? These questions would haunt me in the weeks to come, but on that Thanksgiving day, as we drove to my parents' house with a store-bought pumpkin pie on my lap, I was simply focused on getting through another Wilson family dinner with my dignity intact. "Remember," I told Emma as we pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, We're leaving by 8. No matter what Grandma says about dessert. Emma had nodded, clutching her backpack filled with books and her tablet, her emergency escape plan for when family conversation became too uncomfortable. Little did I know that backpack also contained a notepad where she would write the 3 words that would change everything. The moment I read Emma's note, time seemed to fracture. The chatter around the dinner table continued. My mother detailing her church committee's latest fundraiser. Michael bragging about Noah's soccer achievements. But it all became white noise as those 3 numbers screamed in my head. 911. Would you pass the gravy, Sam? She gave an almost imperceptible nod toward my father, who sat at the head of the table carving his 3rd slice of turkey. Excuse me, I said, standing suddenly. Bathroom break. I walked, didn't run though every instinct screamed at me to. Down the hallway to the powder room, clutching my phone in a white-knuckled grip. Once inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. 3 years earlier, Emma and I had had a serious talk about emergencies after a lockdown drill at her school had left her with nightmares. If you're ever in real danger, I told her, and you need help immediately, you call 911. Not for small problems, not as a joke. Only for real emergencies when someone might get badly hurt. Emma had nodded solemnly. Like if there's a fire or someone can't breathe or has a really bad injury? Exactly, I'd confirmed. Or if someone is threatening to hurt you or someone else. My daughter understood the seriousness of those 3 numbers. She wouldn't use them, or even suggest using them lightly. With shaking hands, I texted her. What's happening? Are you safe? Could she be seeing problems that weren't there? But Emma wasn't a dramatic child. If anything, she tended to downplay problems, not create them. And she adored her grandfather. She wouldn't make something up about him. I texted back. What are you seeing? Specific symptoms. The reply came quickly. His face looks funny on one side. He dropped his fork twice but tried to hide it. He's sweating a lot. And when he talked to me earlier, his words were all mushy. My heart stuttered. I'd taken a comprehensive first aid course when Emma started school, and those symptoms triggered alarm bells. Face drooping, coordination issues, slurred speech, classic stroke warning signs. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to think clearly. Could be nothing. Dad was 72 and had been working in the yard all morning despite the November chill. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe Emma was seeing problems through her 12-year-old lens that weren't really there. But what if she was right? When I returned to the dining room, I studied my father with new awareness. He was quieter than usual, letting my mother and brother carry the conversation. There was a slight sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the room being comfortably cool. As I watched, he reached for his water glass and his hand trembled slightly. Dad, are you feeling okay? I asked during a lull in conversation. My mother answered before he could. He's fine. Just tired from putting up all those ridiculous Christmas lights you insisted on having as a child. He won't listen when I tell him to hire someone. Dad smiled, but it looked off lopsided, with the right side of his mouth not quite moving in sync with the left. I'm right as rain, Sammy. Don't fuss. The words were slightly slurred. Subtle enough that you might not notice if you weren't looking for it. But I was looking now, and alarm prickled along my spine. Michael caught my expression and rolled his eyes. Here we go with the drama. Can we have one dinner without you making it about you, Sam? I'm not. I began, but my mother cut me off. More stuffing, anyone? Stephanie, you've hardly touched yours. Is my recipe not up to your standards? And just like that, the moment passed. Conversation shifting to my mother's passive-aggressive interrogation of my sister-in-law's eating habits. But now I couldn't unsee the signs in my father. The slight drooping of his right eyelid. The way he kept missing his mouth slightly when he raised his fork. The sheen of sweat despite the mild temperature. I glanced at Emma, who was watching her grandfather with an intensity that confirmed my fears. She'd noticed what the adults were all missing, or choosing to ignore. I had a terrible flashback to my childhood, when Dad had experienced severe chest pains during my 10th birthday party, but insisted on continuing because we didn't want to ruin Sammy's special day. 3 days later, he'd ended up in the hospital with a minor heart attack. The Wilson family motto might as well have been, ignore it until you can't. As dinner continued, I kept careful watch while trying to decide what to do. Call an ambulance to a family dinner based on a child's observation and my own suspicions? Create a scene that would cement my reputation as the family drama queen if I was wrong? Or wait and potentially waste precious minutes if something truly was wrong? Emma became increasingly agitated beside me, pushing food around her plate and shooting worried glances at her grandfather. When Dad stood to offer his traditional Thanksgiving toast, the glass in his hand trembled so badly that wine sloshed over the rim. "I'm blessed to have my FF family here," he said, the stutter new and frightening. 43 years with my Barbara. 2 wonderful children and... He paused, seemingly searching for words. "And the little ones. So thankful." He'd forgotten his grandchildren's names. My father, who prided himself on his sharp mind, who completed the New York Times crossword in pen every Sunday, couldn't remember the names of the grandchildren he adored. "Harold, sit down," my mother hissed, her eyes darting nervously around the table. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Dad," I said firmly, "I think we should call a doctor." "Don't be ridiculous," my mother snapped. "He's fine. Just tired." Michael nodded in agreement. "Stop trying to create drama, Sam. It's Thanksgiving, for God's sake." Emma's hand found mine under the table and squeezed hard. The adults were all choosing not to see what was happening, but my 12-year-old refused to look away. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I needed to trust her, not them. The remainder of dinner proceeded with an artificial normalcy that felt like stretched plastic wrap over a boiling pot. I maintained the expected small talk while monitoring my father with growing alarm. Each time he missed his mouth with his fork or paused mid-sentence, searching for a word that should have come easily, my anxiety ratcheted higher. "So Sam," Stephanie asked, her voice deliberately bright, "how's the dating scene for single moms these days?" "Non-existent," I replied automatically, my eyes tracking my father's increasingly clumsy movements. He'd always been meticulous, cutting his food into precise bites. Now he was struggling to grip his knife. "You're not getting any younger," my mother chimed in. "Emma needs a father figure." "Emma has me," I said. Under different circumstances, I might have launched into my standard defense of single motherhood, but I couldn't focus on anything except the concerning symptoms manifesting across the table. Dad stared at him blankly for a moment too long. "Boat? Yes, good. Very good." Michael didn't seem to notice the strange response, but Emma did. She nudged my foot under the table, her eyes wide with worry. I thought about all the times in my childhood when my father had dismissed health concerns. The time he'd coached Michael's baseball game with a fever of 102. The Christmas he'd refused to go to the yard despite a clearly broken toe because he wouldn't ruin the holiday. The family camping trip where he'd hidden a wasp sting despite knowing he was allergic, only telling us when his throat began to close. Harold Wilson didn't do weakness. He didn't acknowledge pain. And my mother had always supported this stoicism. "Your father is fine, Samantha. Stop creating problems where there aren't any." "I'm not creating." "Typical Sam," Michael interrupted with an eye roll. "Always has to be the center of attention." "That's not fair," I protested, feeling my face flush. "I'm genuinely concerned." "You're concerned about disrupting Thanksgiving dinner," my mother cut in. "Your father worked hard all year for this family time, and you want to ruin it with unnecessary drama." Emma's face had gone pale, her food untouched. She was watching the adults argue while her grandfather's condition deteriorated right before our eyes. Dad attempted to join the conversation. "No fighting on the day. The turkey day." I opened my mouth to argue further when my father suddenly stood up. "I'm just going to." He gestured vaguely toward the hallway. Every instinct screamed that something was very wrong. But before I could react, he took 2 unsteady steps and collapsed, crumpling to the hardwood floor with a thud that seemed to shake the entire house. "Harold!" My mother's scream pierced the air as she rushed to his side. For a moment, everyone froze in tableau. My mother kneeling beside my father, Michael half risen from his chair, Stephanie clutching her children protectively, and Emma looking at me with wide, frightened eyes that seemed to say, "I told you so." I instructed Michael sharply. When he just stood there, paralyzed, I dialed myself, putting the phone on speaker as I positioned my father in the recovery position. 911, what's your emergency? My father has collapsed. I suspect he's having a stroke. My voice came out steadier than I felt as I reported his symptoms: facial drooping, slurred speech, coordination problems leading to collapse. Is he breathing? The dispatcher asked. Yes, but it's labored. I checked his pulse. Pulse is rapid. My mother was sobbing, clearing space around my father and quietly directing her younger cousins away from the scene. At 12, she showed more presence of mind than most of the adults in the room. This can't be happening, he muttered. Then turning to me with sudden anger. This is your fault. You upset him with all your questions and concerns. Michael. Stephanie gasped. She's always doing this, he continued, voice rising hysterically. Creating drama. Making everything about her. Enough. Emma's voice cut through the chaos. Surprisingly authoritative for a 12-year-old. Grandpa needs help, not fighting. The sound of sirens filled the air. And moments later paramedics were streaming through the front door that Stephanie had thought to open. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, asking questions, loading my father onto a stretcher. Clear stroke symptoms, I heard one paramedic say to another. Time is brain. Let's move. I'm going with him, my mother insisted, grabbing her purse with shaking hands. Me too, I said firmly, making eye contact with Emma. Can you stay with Aunt Stephanie and your cousins? I'll call you as soon as we know anything. A strange new respect between us. My daughter had seen what the adults had refused to acknowledge, and she'd had the courage to act. The ambulance ride was tense and surreal. My mother clutched my father's hand, whispering prayers while the paramedics worked around her. I answered their rapid-fire questions about his medical history, medications. The paramedic nodded appreciatively. Smart kid. Early intervention makes all the difference with strokes. Time is brain. My mother looked up, confusion mixing with her fear. What do you mean? Emma noticed. Harold was fine until he fell. I met her eyes steadily. No, Mom. He wasn't fine. Emma saw it. I saw it. We all saw it, but only Emma was brave enough to say something. As the ambulance raced toward the hospital, lights flashing and siren wailing, I thought about my daughter's simple note, call 911, and wondered how different things might have been if I'd trusted her instincts sooner. The emergency room erupted into action the moment we arrived. Medical staff swarmed around my father's stretcher, calling out medical terms that blurred together in my anxiety. Possible ischemic stroke. Get CT stat. BP 180 over 110. Prepare for TPA if confirmed. They wheeled him away through double doors, leaving my mother and me standing in the sudden quiet of the waiting area. She seemed to have aged a decade in the past hour. Her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears. Her shoulders hunched under the weight of fear. They'll take good care of him, I said, guiding her to a seat. The words felt hollow even as I spoke them. This came out of nowhere, she whispered, clutching her purse like a life preserver. He was fine this morning. Fine. I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation needed to happen. Mom, he wasn't fine. Emma noticed symptoms at least an hour before he collapsed. I saw them too. That's ridiculous. Harold would have said something if he felt poorly. Would he, though? I asked gently. When has Dad ever admitted to being sick or in pain? Before she could answer, Michael burst through the emergency room doors, his face ashen. How is he? What are they saying? They're running tests, I explained. We don't know anything yet. He paced the small waiting area, running his hands through his hair. I left Stephanie with the kids. She'll bring them home and come back. He stopped suddenly, turning to me with accusation in his eyes. Why didn't you do something sooner? You're the one with the medical training. The injustice of his attack stung, but I kept my voice level. I tried, Michael. I asked multiple times if something was wrong. Everyone shut me down. You should have insisted. I couldn't stay home, Mom, not knowing if Grandpa. I held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. It's okay, sweetie. Thank you for coming. How did you even know something was wrong? Michael demanded, turning his frustration toward Emma. "You're 12. Emma straightened her shoulders, suddenly looking older than her years. "We had an assembly at school last month about recognizing strokes. Mom came and gave a presentation with cousin Audrey. They taught us fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulties. Time to call 911. She swallowed hard. Grandpa's face was drooping on one side. He kept dropping things. His words were all mushy. I remembered what Mom said, that with strokes minutes matter. The next 24 hours will be critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Will he?" My mother couldn't finish the question. "Recovery varies from patient to patient," the doctor said gently. "But I can tell you this. Whoever recognized the symptoms and got him help so quickly gave him the best possible chance. With strokes we have a saying, time is brain. Every minute counts." All eyes turned to Emma, who stood tall despite the tears streaming down her face. "Can we see him?" I asked. "Briefly. He's being moved to the ICU for monitoring." As the doctor led us toward the intensive care unit, a nurse touched my arm. "Your daughter saved his life, you know. Most people miss the early signs. If you'd waited until he collapsed to call 911, we might be having a very different conversation right now." Pride and guilt warred within me. Pride in Emma's awareness and courage. Guilt that I hadn't acted more decisively on her warning. I squeezed her hand as we walked, a silent acknowledgement of the debt we all owed her. My father looked small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and N4. My mother rushed to his side, taking his hand and pressing it to her cheek. "Harold, darling, we're here. You're going to be fine." His eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty. When he spotted Emma, a faint smile lifted the functioning side of his mouth. He tried to speak but couldn't form the words. "Don't try to talk, Dad," I said softly. "Just rest." As we stood around his bed, the facade of Wilson family perfection had been stripped away, leaving only our raw, imperfect humanity. My brother's shoulders shook with silent sobs. My mother's carefully constructed world of denial had crumbled. And my daughter, my incredible, observant, brave daughter, had proven wiser than all of us. The morning sun was just beginning to streak the sky when a different doctor came to update us. My mother and I had stayed through the night, while Michael had gone home to his family with promises to return early. "The medication has successfully dissolved the clot," the doctor explained. "The MRI shows minimal permanent damage, largely due to how quickly he received treatment." He looked at each of us. "Mr. Wilson is extraordinarily lucky. Most stroke patients don't get help until major symptoms appear." "It wasn't luck," my mother said, her voice steady for the first time since the collapse. "It was Emma. She saw what the rest of us didn't want to see." As the doctor continued explaining my father's treatment plan and prognosis, I thought about all the warnings we'd ignored, not just today but throughout my life in this family. The emotional distress disguised as having a bad day. The concerning behaviors dismissed as just tired. The physical symptoms minimized as nothing to worry about. How many problems had festered in our family because we refused to acknowledge them? How many relationships had suffered because we prioritized the appearance of perfection over messy reality? My father's stroke had torn away the veil of denial we'd hidden behind for decades. The question now was whether we would have the courage to keep facing the truth, even after the immediate crisis had passed. The hospital waiting room became our family's new gathering place over the next 2 days. The vinyl chairs and antiseptic smell replaced my mother's dining room table and pumpkin spice candles. We took shifts, my mother refusing to leave except for quick showers at my nearby apartment, Michael coming after work, me balancing hospital time with caring for Emma, and the necessary calls to update extended family. On the third morning, the neurologist met with us all to discuss my father's condition and recovery plan. "Mr. Wilson has been extremely fortunate," Dr. Chin explained, showing us brain scans on her tablet. "The clot-busting medication worked well because it was administered so quickly. We're seeing minimal permanent damage." "So he'll be completely back to normal?" my mother asked hopefully. The doctor's expression grew measured. "Stroke recovery is a marathon, not a sprint, Mrs. Wilson. Your husband will need rehabilitation therapy, speech, physical, and occupational. He may have some lingering effects, but given the circumstances, his prognosis is very good. How long until he's back to his old self? Michael pressed. That varies widely from patient to patient, Dr. Chun replied. Some recover most functions within months, others have a longer journey. The important thing to understand is that this was a serious medical event, not something to rush through or minimize. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. I don't understand how this happened. Harold has always been so healthy. Dr. Chun glanced down at her notes. Actually, Mr. Wilson's file indicates he had several TIAs, transient ischemic attacks, essentially mini-strokes over the past year. These are often warning signs of a major stroke. The silence that followed was deafening. That's not possible, my mother finally said. And there was an incident at his dental appointment where he experienced temporary facial numbness. I felt cold all over. Dad never said anything about dizzy spells or numbness. Dear. Chun looked between us, realization dawning in her eyes. I see. Well, regardless of what happened before, what matters now is supporting his recovery and preventing future strokes. This will require some lifestyle changes and regular medical follow-ups. After the doctor left, we sat in stunned silence. My father had been experiencing warning signs and had told no one, or at least not his family. I can't believe he kept this from us, Michael said finally. My mother stared at her hands. He didn't keep it from me, she whispered. I knew about the dizzy spells. He made me promise not to worry you kids. Mom! Michael and I exclaimed simultaneously. You don't understand. She continued, tears streaming down her face. Your father has always been so strong, so capable. He didn't want anyone to see him as diminished. So you both just pretended everything was fine? I asked incredulous. Even when it clearly wasn't. That's how we've always handled things, she said defensively. We don't burden others with our problems. This isn't about burdening others, I said, feeling 40 years of frustration bubbling to the surface. This is about basic health and safety. Dad could have died because of this ridiculous need to maintain appearances. Don't you dare speak to me that way, my mother snapped. You have no idea what it takes to hold a family together for 43 years. Maybe I don't want to know if it means lying to the people I love. Michael stepped between us. This isn't helping Dad. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. You're right. I'm sorry. But Mom, we can't keep doing this. This family habit of ignoring problems until they explode nearly cost Dad his life. My mother's shoulders slumped. I was so scared, she admitted, her voice small. Every time he had one of those episodes, I was terrified it meant I might lose him. It was easier to pretend they weren't happening than to face that fear. Is Grandpa okay? She asked anxiously. He's stable, sweetie, I assured her. The doctor says he has a good chance of recovery because we got him help so quickly. Emma visibly relaxed. Can I see him? In a little while, I promised. He's resting now. As Stephanie took the kids to the cafeteria for lunch, my mother, Michael, and I continued our conversation. There's something I need to know, I said quietly. Those episodes Dad was having, is that why Emma said he'd been acting weird lately? My mother looked stricken. He had a spell when he was teaching her chess last month. His speech got jumbled for about a minute. We told her he was just tired. Jesus, Mom, Michael muttered. You taught a 12-year-old to ignore medical emergencies? We didn't think it was an emergency, she protested. The doctor said they were transient. They went away on their own. Those are warnings, I explained, struggling to keep my voice level. They're the body's way of saying a bigger stroke might be coming. Well, how was I supposed to know that? My mother's voice rose defensively. I'm not a doctor. No, but you could have talked to one instead of hiding the problem. I shot back. This isn't just about Dad's stroke. It's about this family's pathological need to pretend everything's perfect when it's falling apart. Michael ran his hands through his hair. Sam's right, Mom. We've all been playing this game for too long. I've been pretending my marriage is perfect when Stephanie and I have been in counseling for years. I've been acting like my job is secure when my firm is downsizing next month. We're all just pretending. My mother looked between us, her carefully constructed world crumbling before her eyes. "I didn't know," she whispered, "about any of it. Because we didn't tell you," I said gently. "Because in this family we don't talk about real problems. We don't show weakness. We don't ask for help." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Wilson is awake and asking for his family. He's a bit disoriented, so please keep the visit brief." We composed ourselves and headed to my father's room. Emma was already there. She must have slipped away from Stephanie, sitting beside his bed, carefully holding his hand. "Grandpa's been telling me about when you were little, Mom," she said as we entered. "He remembers everything." My father's speech was still slurred, but comprehensible. "SM smart girl," he managed, patting Emma's hand. "Saved me." "She did," I agreed, blinking back tears. "She saw what was happening when the rest of us missed it. Or ignored it," my mother added quietly. My father's eyes found hers, communication passing between them that needed no words after 43 years of marriage. He gestured weakly for us all to come closer. "I'm sorry," he said with effort. "Should have told you about the episodes." "Why didn't you, Dad?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. My father's eyes filled with tears. "Didn't want to be weak. To worry everyone." "That's not weakness," Emma said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "Everybody needs help sometimes." A tear slid down my father's cheek. Wise granddaughter. As the morning light streamed through the hospital window, illuminating our imperfect family circle, I realized we were experiencing something rare and precious. Absolute honesty. No facades. No performances, no pretending, just raw, messy truth. "Things need to change," I said quietly. "All of us, we need to stop hiding our problems from each other. It's not working. And it's hurting us all." My mother nodded slowly. "I don't know how to be any different," she admitted. "But I know we can't go back to the way things were. We'll figure it out together," Michael said, squeezing her shoulder. My father struggled to speak again. Proud of Emma. Saw the truth. Wasn't afraid to say it. Emma beamed despite her tears. "I was scared," she confessed. "But Mom always says being brave isn't about not feeling afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid." I hadn't realized she'd been listening to my little life lessons, much less internalizing them. Parenting, like stroke recovery, offered no instant feedback. The results of our efforts often revealed themselves only in crisis moments. As a nurse came to shoo us out so my father could rest, I realized dawn had broken, literally and figuratively. We had survived the night, and while the road ahead would be challenging, we were finally facing it together, in the light, with no more secrets between us. 3 months after my father's stroke, we gathered for another family dinner, this time at my apartment. The symbolism of the change in venue wasn't lost on any of us. The torch of family gatherings had passed, at least temporarily, from my mother's immaculate dining room to my cozy, somewhat cluttered living space. Dad entered slowly, leaning on a walker but moving under his own power. The physical therapist had warned us not to help unless he asked. He needed to rebuild his strength and confidence. "Something smells amazing, Sammy," he said. His speech clear though slightly slower than before the stroke. The speech therapy had been grueling but effective. "Emma made her famous lasagna," I replied, watching my daughter beam with pride as she set the table. "With extra cheese, just how you like it, Grandpa," she added. My mother followed with a store-bought pie, a concession that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. "I brought dessert," she announced, placing it on the counter without apology or explanation. The Barbara Wilson of the past would have spent days baking from scratch rather than admit she was too exhausted from caring for my recovering father. The new Barbara was learning, slowly and sometimes reluctantly, that perfection was less important than presence. Michael and Stephanie arrived with their children. The tension between them noticeably reduced, since they'd started being honest about their struggles. They weren't perfect, none of us were, but they were real in a way they hadn't been before. As we settled around my table, mismatched chairs, everyday dishes, nothing like my mother's coordinated tableware, I felt a sense of rightness that had been missing from our family gatherings for as long as I could remember. "Before we eat," my father said, raising his water glass in a slightly trembling hand. I want to say something. He cleared his throat. 3 months ago, I nearly died because I was too proud and too stubborn to admit I needed help. I'd been having warning signs for almost a year, and I ignored them. Barbara and I both pretended everything was fine. Because that's what we've always done. My mother reached for his hand, tears shining in her eyes. But my granddaughter, he continued, looking at Emma with undisguised admiration, saw what was happening and had the courage to speak up when the adults in the room couldn't or wouldn't. Emma saved my life. Emma ducked her head, embarrassed by the attention. I just remembered what Mom taught me. And that's the other thing, my father said, turning to me. Sammy, you've always been the truth teller in this family, even when we didn't want to hear it. I'm sorry we dismissed your concerns all these years. You were right about so many things. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thanks, Dad. This stroke has been terrible, he acknowledged. But it's also been a wake-up call. I don't want to waste whatever time I have left pretending everything's fine when it isn't. Life's too short for that kind of dishonesty. Hear, hear. Michael raised his glass. To honesty. And to Emma, the bravest Wilson of us all. We clinked glasses as Emma blushed deeper. Speaking of honesty, my mother said hesitantly, I've been seeing someone. We all stared at her. A therapist, she clarified quickly. Dr. Ramirez has been helping me understand why I've always been so rigid about appearances. Coming from my mother, this admission was as shocking as if she'd announced she was joining the circus. Barbara Wilson had always dismissed therapy as paying strangers to listen to your problems. That's wonderful, Mom, I said, genuinely proud of her courage. It's not easy, she admitted. Talking about feelings has never been my strong suit. But nearly losing your father made me realize I don't want to lose the rest of my family, because I can't communicate. As dinner progressed, the conversation flowed more naturally than it ever had at my parents' formal table. We talked about real things. Michael's job insecurity, Stephanie's struggles with depression, my dating disasters, and even Emma's difficulties at school with the bullying situation. No one pretended everything was perfect. No one changed the subject when uncomfortable topics arose. We just talked, listened, sometimes disagreed, but always with the underlying understanding that we were in this together. After dessert, as Michael and Stephanie cleared plates, another new development, my mother allowing others to help, Dad beckoned Emma to sit beside him on the couch. I've been wanting to thank you properly, he said, taking her hand in his. The doctor said if I hadn't gotten treatment when I did, I might not be here, or I might not be able to talk or walk at all. Emma squeezed his hand. I was so scared, Grandpa. I didn't know if I should say something, or if I was just being silly. But you did say something, and that made all the difference. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This was my father's. I want you to have it. Emma opened the box to find an antique compass, its brass casing polished to a warm glow. A compass? She asked, turning it carefully in her hands. Because you found the right direction when everyone else was lost, he explained. Including me. Over her shoulder, his eyes met mine, filled with a new appreciation for the daughter I'd raised. And perhaps for me as well. Later, as we said our goodbyes, Michael pulled me aside. I've been a real jerk to you over the years, Sam. Water under the bridge, I assured him. No, it's not, he insisted. I was jealous, if you want the truth. You always had the courage to be yourself, even when it meant disappointing Mom and Dad. I was too afraid of losing their approval to ever be that honest. His confession stunned me. I always thought you had everything figured out. He laughed. That was the act. Inside, I've been terrified of failure my whole life. Watching you rebuild after your divorce. That's what I've been trying to say for years. As my family departed, my father moving slowly but steadily, my mother hovering nearby but respecting his independence, Michael and Stephanie holding hands for the first time in years, I felt a profound shift in our family dynamic. Emma and I stood in the doorway, waving until they drove away. We did good tonight, she said, leaning against me. You've been doing good all along, I told her, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. I'm so proud of the person you're becoming, Emma. reflecting on everything that had changed. My father was recovering, slowly building back the strength and skills the stroke had compromised. My mother was confronting decades of emotional avoidance in therapy. My brother and I were developing a relationship based on truth rather than competition. And Emma, my incredible, perceptive daughter, had emerged from this crisis with a new confidence in her own judgment. The quiet child who had once shrunk from family conflict now knew the power of her own voice. As a school counselor, I'd always taught children to speak up when something felt wrong, but I'd never fully appreciated how difficult that could be in a family system designed to maintain the status quo. Emma had shown more courage in passing me that note than many adults show in a lifetime. Sometimes it takes a child to say what adults are too afraid to acknowledge. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message. And sometimes salvation comes in the form of 3 simple numbers, written on a note slipped under a table. Please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe for more stories about finding courage in unexpected moments. And leave a comment telling me about a time when you or someone you know spoke up when it mattered most. Thank you for listening, and remember, the truth may be uncomfortable,